A very good morning to the professor. For the Comp 420 midterm project, I chose the topic Canada Freedom Convoy, and today I am going to present on the same. Let's start with the beginning of the protest. Canada, as we know, is one of the most peaceful countries in the world, especially in the North America. But in the first month of 2020, a protest began in the capital city of Canada, Ottawa. The protest began in opposition to the government's introduction of a mandate requiring all cross-border truck drivers to be vaccinated against COVID-19. Soon, as the protest started getting support and global acknowledgement, it expanded its focus to oppose all the COVID-related restrictions put up by the federal government. Soon, vaccinated public and non-trucker people also started supporting the Canada Freedom Convoy by being present at the site of the protest and or providing online and financial support. In the month of February, a GoFundMe page was started for donating to the convoy that brought around $8 million from supporters from across the world. With the help of today's technology and the internet, public did not need to rely on media to spread their purpose of their protest and grab attention to their freedom convoy. With the technology, with the technology word of impact of word, the whole globe was introduced to the protest going on in the capital city of Canada. Let's continue the discussion and talk about truckers and vaccine. When the COVID-19 pandemic began and the whole world was shut down, the whole of the Canada and the United States of America were also under quarantine. All the workers started taking leaves from their jobs and many services came to a complete standstill. But many of the truckers did not sit at their homes and kept on working. My brother is also a trucker and a resident of Surrey, British Columbia. He was one of the truck drivers that delivered goods between the Canada and the United States when the pandemic was at the peak. Such truck drivers needed to cross the border usually twice every week, risking their own and their family's safety. Such brave truckers kept on working not just in Canada but all around the world. Many families tested positive with COVID at some point of time and had to quarantine, but truckers, after physical recovery, started working again for the public and earning a livelihood. At the time, the government and the public supported the truckers and thanked them all. Now, when all the people are working again and there is no lack of truck drivers to take an international tour, the government has put up mandates for truckers and is forcing them to take vaccine shots. If they are not vaccinated, US allows them to enter to the states and deliver goods, but the truckers' own country does not allow them to get back to Canada. One may think there no other option for such truckers? Yes, there is. If the truckers prevent going to the United States and take a tour inside Canada only, the road they need to take to get out of Fraser Valley region and towards other cities like Calgary and Edmonton is Trans-Canada Highway. It is a single-lane highway at some locations, passing through the mountains and many times covered with snow and black ice. The road is highly dangerous and even truckers that have been driving for years and decades feel unsafe traveling on the highway. This puts their safety at higher stakes. At the end, the government left the unvaccinated truckers of southern BC to either take an unsafe trip inside Canada that risks their lives or stay unemployed, as going to the States was not an option anymore. This not only cost them their livelihoods, but the truckers that own their own trucks also need to pay the insurance and installments of the trucks every month worth thousands of dollars. This situation is even worse for families where the truck driver is the only working person in this ongoing pandemic. Hence, the national government is forcing truckers to either take drugs they wish not to take or choose between risking their lives or livelihood. Talking about the protest as it continued, Canada Freedom Convoy was a peaceful protest, what I would say, that, as we discussed, began to oppose government's vaccine mandates on its own truck drivers. The truckers felt as if their freedom to choose which drugs they shall and let enter their body and which medical procedure they wish to go through was being taken away, thus practicing their freedom of speech. The Canada residents protested. They gathered on the streets of Ottawa and made a significant impact on the nation. Many who could not reach the capital protested and marched in their own cities. With their word spreading on the internet like wildfire, they received worldwide coverage and demonstrated the failure of Canadian government to all the countries. To the government, the protest also costed hundreds of dollars in police expenses and more due to the loss of trade. Trudeau called the protesters a minority and a fringe group that he did not take seriously at first, but this fringe group managed to shake his ruling government. But like most other topics, this is also not something completely black or white. There exist some things that took place at the protest sites that I personally don't agree with. While the protest stayed peaceful for the most part of its existence, the convoy started blocking major roads, including the Ambassador Bridge connecting Ontario and Detroit. This bridge carries nearly a quarter of the international trade between the two countries, Canada and the United States. Protesters had blocked the bridge for days, holding up $360 million of daily trade and drawing attention for the White House, said one of the reporters in their article. This step surely served its purpose to grab attention from the US government, but more than that, it impacted the residents of both the countries, their travel, and also the economies. A significant portion of the cross-border trade was stopped. This, in addition to thousands of truckers at the protest, led to huge shortage of goods in stores, especially near the border. The public and the innocent residents of both the nations were suffering due to this. Yes, the government can stop this by agreeing to the truckers' wishes, but this move is not something I support as it gave unnecessary inconvenience to the common people. I believe this disruption is what led the government to end the otherwise peaceful protest forcefully. Now let's move on to the end of the protest. It started with Facebook removing Freedom Convoy page. In the beginning of the month of February, Facebook took a step which I would consider to be the violation of the right of freedom of speech. Facebook removed the Convoy to DC 2020 page from its site and app. The group page provided a means of communication for a very large population of people with similar interests. What the Facebook pages are supposed to be. But it was removed with the statement that it violated policies around QAnon. Apart from this, Facebook also removed the personal accounts of Jeremy Johnson, the trucker who created the Facebook group. Along with this, Brian Braze, who helped organize the US truck protest, said he was troubled by the alleged censorship without further clarification from Facebook's parent company, Meta. This is not just a violation of the freedom of speech, but also privacy, as Facebook is targeting specific people related to a cause which has nothing to do with Meta or Facebook. One may consider their online accounts as a part of their intellectual property. It very well could be. Thus, Facebook's actions may be listed as Jeremy and Brian losing their intellectual property too. Later on, GoFundMe suspended Freedom Convoy 2020 fundraiser. As we know, GoFundMe is a fundraising platform created for crowdfunding. You can start a fundraiser and people from across the globe can donate on GoFundMe.com. One such fundraiser was Freedom Convoy 2020, created for the Canadian comrades that helped protesters in collecting more than $10 million in total. But it was suspended off by GoFundMe for no particular reason at all, except that it was generating funds for the protesters protesting against the ruling government and the restrictions on a minority. This is another example of what I believe, sorry, this is another example of what I believe is taking away people's freedom to use a public platform for their own uh, use without violating any of companies' policies. Now let's talk about the real end of the protest, the Emergency Act. On February 14th, 2022, Trudeau began what was the actual end of the protest. As written by CNN, the Canadian government is invoking the Emergency Act for the first time to address the impact of continued protests across the country over COVID-19 health measures. For the first time since it was founded, the Emergency Act was invoked by the Canadian government to end a protest by the residents of Canada. This action of the Prime Minister Trudeau provided fuel to the hate for Trudeau inside people's hearts. The act even allowed, rather forced, the financial institutions to work alongside police in blocking and freezing funds related to a specific group of people. In this case, the protesters protesting against the government. In total, the officials violated protesters' privacy on platforms including Facebook, GoFundMe, and even banks. The act was invoked after the police authorities cleared the Ambassador Bridge one day before, on 13th February, which was previously blocked by the protesters. Now, I feel the need to mention that this clearance of protesters is not what I would count as police violating people's freedom, as they were blocking public and essential crossways, causing problems to the residents. With donations blocked, protest sites being cleared, and protesters being threatened to be arrested, the Freedom Convoy started losing its power and the protesters started leaving. On 16th February, police handed flyers to protesters in the capital who kept holding on. Many threw the flyers in the bins and blew horns as a symbol of their refusal to move, practicing their rights to the freedom of speech. The flyers rather warned them that they would be arrested. But next day, police arrested three of the Freedom Convoy's most prominent leaders: Tamara Lich, Chris Barber, and Pat King. On 18th February, police cleared all the protesters from the capital. They used force on demonstrators and arrested more than 100 protesters. The very next day, Police was ready to completely end the protest by any amount of force required and came dressed in riot gear, as we can see in the top left image. The police used pepper sprays and arrested another 47 people, and a woman was even trampled by the horse of a mounted police officer. Such actions continued till all the protesters were dispersed and the protest was put to a complete end. Talking about clearing the aftermath. Now that the freedom convoy and the protest is cleared and the main three leaders are arrested, the Canadian lawmakers have turned to the same debate as us. Whether Trudeau was justified in invoking the Emergencies Act, whether this act be ratified. Is this the Canada's biggest example of attacks on people's freedom, especially their freedom to choose the medication they want and their freedom of speech? Is this also an attack on democracy? Members of the opposition party, the Conservatives, say yes to the above questions. But Trudeau's leading party opposes their beliefs and supports the PM's actions. On February 21st, a vote of 185 to 151 in the House of Commons said that the Emergencies Act was justified, but Trudeau decided to revoke the act anyway. Because the decision was split down between parties, uh, two parties supporting the motion and two parties against the motion, we cannot completely say the votes were, well, the same as what the individual lawmakers believed. Irrespective of the decision, including my own self, many, including my own self, believe the mandates are a violation of the people's freedom and the measures taken by the government, both a violation of the freedom of speech and privacy of the protesters. I'm going to end this topic by discussing my own personal view. Now, to make myself very clear, I completely support the COVID-19 vaccines. While the vaccines may not be fully effective, they work as immunity boosters and protects its recipients. My whole family and I are double vaccinated. But at the same time, I do not support forcing some drugs on some people. Continuing the concern of public safety, it may be argued that vaccines are helpful for truckers crossing the border. Yes, they are. But we cannot also forget that when the government and the nation needed the truckers in 2020, when everyone was quarantining and leaving their jobs, when some truckers were risking their health and safety, when people had not developed any immunity against the new COVID-19 disease, the government completely accepted truck drivers carrying goods across the nation and fully supported them. Now, when there is no shortage of vaccinated truck drivers, the government is forcing their will and restricting work and earning of a minority that includes the unvaccinated truckers. This is completely unfair and unethical, and even selfish to some extent. Along with this, the Canada Freedom Convoy and the protest went quite peaceful with some inconveniences caused to other people. Police authorities were the ones using violence and hurting people in order to end the protest. They were also freezing funds, blocking donations, deleting pages and accounts of protesters on Facebook. Hence, the government tried to stop people from spreading their word using technology, which the protesters still managed to do. The government also tried to violate the privacy of a few protesters, take their intellectual property away from them, and prevent all protesters from participating their freedom of speech. This is the reason I, along with millions of people across the globe, support the truckers and their cause. We believe truckers must be given all the rights and freedom they deserve, like any other group of people. That is the end of my presentation, and thank you, Professor.